So moving to our very last section of the 4-day course. This last part is about public repositories. So we're coming right back into open science. So this is where we have to consider which is the best repository for you, for your projects, for your data to publish. And so keeping in mind, again, our most important principles in this course, which is fair. These are the important factors when it comes to considering which repositories to use and also what type of data that is associated. For example, those that Jean-Karim has in the templates is those minimal metadata standards that are important to include when it comes to uploading and publishing your data. So research data repositories are essentially online repositories that allow preservation, curation, and the publication of your research products. So one thing that we always advocate with EMBL Open Science is that your research scholarship is much more than just the publication. The publication, we sometimes even think about it as an advertisement to your research discoveries. And what really holds it up is the actual data, software, and everything that is needed to create those figures. So now it's important to think about actually sharing those for your data, your code, and your protocols. So repositories are important for these two elements of FAIR, so the findability and accessibility. And so here are just some more general data agnostic repositories that you can use. This is some recommendations from the course curriculum. So some of them are Dryad, Zenodo, you probably have heard about, it's very common, Figshare, and Dataverse. And I think Jean-Karim has some thoughts about these particular repositories. Maybe you want to share those now. We discussed this already. Yeah.
Those are typically recommended by a lot of people. And so what I want to say about them is that they are basically data dumps. So you can satisfy some funders' requirement because the data is going to be somewhat accessible. But in my view, they don't satisfy the FAIR requirements. So the data is barely findable because you usually can only access it or find it via the publication and not by association with some search or association with similar data sets. They are not interoperable because there is no enforcement of any standards or curation of those data. So, and because people don't take these things very seriously, it's basically just dumping data in whichever way is convenient for the authors, not really thinking about reusability. And so from my point of view, for having tried to reuse a couple of data sets that were in those repositories, they are not reusable. There's just too much information missing. The formats are cryptic, to say the least. There's no explanatory documents for the most part. You don't know exactly what is what in there. So I only recommend them to put data that wouldn't fit anywhere else. But if there is a public data repository for your particular data type, I would just recommend using that first. Even though that going the Zenodo route might be easier because there is you're just basically uploading some data, dumping it there and getting a DOI to put in the paper. It's also detrimental because it takes the data away from the public repositories where actually people would look at them in the first place. So yeah, they're useful, but only for data that wouldn't go anywhere else. But for most biological data nowadays, we have repositories, structured repositories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So what we recommend is to find the community trusted repository for your particular data and for your field. Back to the data side of things again. So just want to share some resources that are developed by EMBL and supported by EMBL that are also open to all researchers. So one of them is BioStudies. So this is one data repository that is great for any type of data that doesn't fit into structured archives. For example, the bioinformatics or genomics archives at EMBL EBI. And one specific one that might be relevant for those microscopists or image analysis researchers is Bioimage Archive. And I also heard of success of people depositing very interesting data types like volumetric data. It also had worked. Yeah, so this is one of them. And the next one I want to share is just a general list of EMBL's open access resources. So if you go to ebi.ac.uk/services, you can find a very large number of tools that are appropriate for your data analysis, and also various data repositories. And the last one I want to share is Elixir. Elixir is an intergovernmental organization that coordinates life sciences resources as well. So they have, I think, a tool platform as well as a data platform where you can find ones that are very much relevant to you. So I think if you're in the bioinformatics genomics field, you can see and find the most trusted and most commonly used resources for your particular subject and use those. So this is what we have here. There's other examples of domain-specific type of repositories, for example, protein data, UniProt, sequence data, and NCBI, metabolomics data, and yeah, we already discussed GitHub, which is a commonly used repository for code, but maybe not ideal for long-term usage. So I think as the last exercise, I think we can maybe take some minutes to think about your own data and find your own repository. So we'll just give everybody 5 minutes for that. And if you could please add it to the pad and just write down what type of data it will be important for you to share and which repository would be ideal for you and why. Okay, so I think we can maybe already start discussing some of these answers. So the first one is GitHub in an academic setting. So I assume this is for your code, especially for collaboration. And the second one is if you have data for a private company, there might be a private Git server for code. And the next one's 3D models. Imagine this is for protein. Great, so just a few more slides on data repositories is that there are some advantages, of course, to using domain-specific repositories. It's just that you could get higher exposure. You will have data-specific features. And these platforms enforce a minimal metadata standard. And it's very likely they have an API that has a public data retrieval aggregation function. And it's possible to have more curated data and better searching and interlinking between data types. So this interlinking thing is, I think, important to keep in mind is that if you have data that's associated with paper or specific analysis code, it's best to link it. And if the platform allows some linking capability, if not, it's possible to also explicitly write down in a README file, for example, where to find other associated data and code. Next slide. So some important aspects of evaluating data repository for you, it's important to ask yourself who is behind it, who funds it, and also what is the quality of the interface and the interaction. Is this working well for you? Is this sufficient and satisfactory for you? If it's very difficult, you may not use it for a very long time, and it's difficult to stay consistent and be disciplined. And the next one is thinking about take up and impact. What can I put into it? Who else is using it? Are most people in my community using it? And will others actually be able to find stuff deposited into it? And is this repository linked to other data repositories? And the last aspect to consider is the policy and process. Does it actually meet our community standards of good practices and policies? Is it at all curated? So in summary, it's ideal to find the suitable repository as soon as you get your data, or even before you get your data, you can consider which is the best repository. And it's important to think about if it permits embargo. It depends on whether you want your data to be openly shared at a certain stage. If it permits embargo, you can allow it to be shared after some time. And you can consider depositing simultaneously to a very specialized repo and a mainstream one. This is a recommendation from the course. Although I think, I don't know what you think, Jean-Karim, about this point. I think depositing to a specialized one that's suitable for you is more sufficient or more suitable for your project. The next one is cross. Sorry, go ahead, Shankar.
Yeah, I was going to say something at the end about this. So you might, what you might want to do is actually deposit your data in one of the suitable public repositories, but sometimes your data needs a little bit of care for visualization or exploration, and you might want to build your own kind of, let's say, interactive visualization, either a web app or something like this, so that you actually add value to your data, because the repositories, if they have visualization capabilities, they are going to be very generic and standardized, whereas your data set might be rich enough that there might be more things you could do with it. So for example, one of the embryonic expression atlas that was published a couple of years ago. Here we made this website. I'm putting the link in the chat, where basically you can explore the data a little bit more, and it doesn't have to be very complicated. It needs a little bit of coding, but it adds value to the data. I can put the link to something more more complicated, where now, because the data itself is quite complex and benefits from basically being presented in a specific way. So and then you also have you can write, for example, and now more people do this more and more, basically web apps, for example, in Shiny, where you can actually give access to your data in a specific way. So for example, here, if you go, put that link here, where you can have companion apps if you want for your paper. Yeah, and as Lisanna puts.
Yeah, great. Thank you for these. Yeah.
You can basically separate.
Yeah, these are really nice examples. Yeah.
You separate the raw data and the processed data, for example, for different audiences.
Yeah, I think we can also add these links to the pad to refer back to. This really is interesting to think about publishing your data not necessarily as a requirement by the journal policy or your institutional policy, but really thinking about how to add more value, interactivity, and usability to your data that you publish. Yeah, and Lisanna added in the chat as well, is that using the mainstream repository can be used as an advertisement just as much as the publication. And you can share the raw data in a repo and stages of the data processing in another, depending on the type of audience you want to reach. Yeah, so this is interesting because so this on the slide, there's a point about adding data availabilities to your section of your papers and list all the public records. So of course, this is important, and list the data link. And this is all enabled to be more findable if your paper also is open access as well. If it's in a closed access paper, then your links to your data is essentially not findable again. And one recommendation here is to list your data sets in ORCID. So it's possible to claim and add data sets onto your ORCID as well to make it even more findable and accessible. So I think with that, we have covered all of the grounds for today. If I don't know if Shankar, you have any more points to add to this repository topic.
No, I just want to add also on the topic of building basically your own web apps or interactive visualization for your data. That's going to to be mostly visible from the paper, just like if you put your data in Zenodo, for example, because people will rarely find it linked elsewhere. Although I'm trying to work with the EBI, for example, and the bioimage archive to try to link some of those visualizations and try to cross-reference different things. So if you have your data in one of the repositories, you could actually point, if they allow it, to your specialized visualization tools for dealing with that data. And ideally, what you could eventually think about is building something that actually queries the data directly from the repository. So you don't need to host the data anymore, just the visualization part, and then the data would be queried from there. So I'm trying to work out some example like this for the bioimage archive, for example. But that definitely adds to the impact of your paper to provide these visualizations and this additional access to the data.
Yeah, certainly. I also just want to remind everyone, if you remember our keynote talk from Anna Kreshuk on the first day, she discussed about how this neuroimaging data was released, and it was so important for the development of segmentation in this whole field. So your data certainly can have a very large impact and be used really to accelerate science and help many of your collaborators.